It's no surprise that Samsung flagships like the S23 Ultra have one of the best camera systems on a smartphone, with their 10x zoom as well as the 200 megapixel sensor. But on the flip side, Samsung might also have some of the worst cameras on a flagship with their foldables. Of course, the main reason you buy a flip or a fold is for the form factor, the compact nature when folded, and additional real estate when open. So it's natural to think that the cameras are an afterthought. But if you're paying $1,000 or even close to $2,000 for a new phone, don't you think the cameras should be good too? So let's compare some photos taken with the Z Flip 4 and Z Fold 4 and compare them with Samsung's flagship, the S23 Ultra. And definitely stick around because I'll be getting into some technical info about the best camera settings as well as some hidden features so that you can take the best pictures no matter which phone you're using. Now, quick disclaimer, because I know that the comparison may not be totally fair since the Z Flip 5 and Z Fold 5 are out already. But I bought all of these Samsung phones with my own money to test out, use, and review, just to keep these videos as unbiased as possible. And yeah, these phones are pretty expensive, so I didn't really feel the need to upgrade to the Flip 5 and Fold 5 because the upgrade seems pretty incremental this time. So yeah, as you're watching and you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to support my channel, please subscribe. It's free and it really helps me out a lot. And if you want to support me in other ways, check out the link in my description for my preset system, which I edit all of my photos with, no matter if it's from my phone or from my camera. Okay, so let's get right into the comparison. Starting off with the ultra wide, the white balance and color reproduction look very similar across all three devices. Even the sharpness and level of detail look comparable when the images are at this size. But when you take a closer look, the S23 Ultra still has more fine detail and texture. Once again, in this example, the three images look very similar. However, I slightly prefer the Z Flip 4's image because the red color really pops. It is on the verge of being oversaturated, but it has some character. The Z Fold 4 has the most realistic looking colors, but once again the Ultra has the most detail. And you can't really tell from these images because they all look fairly bright, but this was taken around sunset on an overcast day, so it definitely was not great lighting conditions. Moving on to the main camera, and once again you can see that all three devices look pretty similar in the ways that they handle the color as well as the highlights and shadows. The S23 Ultra definitely looks the coolest in terms of color temperature, with the Z Fold 4 looking the warmest. In this example, there are more extreme highlights and shadows, and once again I really like the colors coming out of the Z Flip 4. The S23 Ultra looks almost overexposed and over-sharpened in comparison. Here's a close-up shot using the main lens, and I know the framing isn't perfect across all three, but you can tell that the Ultra definitely has the most amount of detail in the leaf as well as the texture in the ice. But it's clear that in bright daylight, all three of these are able to produce really good images. Moving on to low light is where you'll start to see the biggest differences. The Z Flip 4 definitely has the muddiest shadows, while the S23 Ultra is able to retain clarity. However, the image from the S23 Ultra looks way too gray and desaturated. With the Flip 4 and Fold 4, you're able to see the nuance in the color differences. Here's an extreme low light test, where the room was basically pitch black with only a small light source behind me. Surprisingly, I think the Z Flip 4 has the most accurate color reproduction, with the Fold 4 being way too warm. But overall, the S23 Ultra still has the cleanest image with the least amount of noise. But I was really surprised by the image quality coming out of the Z Flip 4. Moving on to some examples using the 3x zoom. Clearly you can see that the Z Flip 4 has the worst image quality because it doesn't have a telephoto lens. This is really unfortunate, and I hope that they add one in the next generation. Here's another example with a 3x lens, and surprisingly the Z Flip 4 looks fairly decent. The Fold 4 actually looks to be the softest, which is surprising. And here's the 10x comparison. Only the S23 Ultra has a 10x lens, so I was surprised to see that the Z Fold 4 was able to do such a good job here. However, it's clear that the S23 Ultra still has the most detail if you look at the deer's fur. Another 10x example in relatively low light, and you can see how quickly the images fall apart from the two foldables. Details are definitely muddy, and the images are a bit noisier. Now let's dive into Lightroom to pixel peep at some examples, and we're starting off with the ultra wide. Again, like I said earlier, they all look good at first glance, but zooming in reveals significant differences, especially when looking at the tires. The S23 Ultra is much sharper. This is evident throughout the entire frame. For example, if you look at the wood siding on the building. The corner performance on the zFlip 4's ultra-wide looks pretty poor. Here's a 3x example between the S23 Ultra and the zFlip 4. Again, it's not really a fair comparison because the Flip 4 doesn't even have a 3x camera, but this shows that the images are still usable at a small scale, but the details are definitely a blurry mess when you zoom in. At least the color and white balance looks good. This next example is taken with the 1x lens in fairly low light, and you can see the Fold 4 does a decent job, but the details are definitely murky. With the S23 Ultra, you can even make out the individual branches on the trees, which is pretty amazing. But scrolling around the frame, you can see how the devices handle the color processing a bit differently. Lastly, here's an example between the Flip 4 and the Fold 4. Like I mentioned earlier, I like the way the Flip 4 was able to render this scene. The orange just pops and the wood looks slightly warmer. Zooming in on the books, you can see slight over-sharpening on the Flip while the Fold looks more natural. And then panning over to the plant, it even looks like there is slightly more detail on the Flip 4, but that could be due to the processing and that over-sharpening we were looking at earlier. Okay, now let's get into some of the more technical info like the best camera settings and some hidden features as well. So for the best camera settings and features, I will start with the Fold because most of the settings are the same across both of these two devices, and the Fold has more settings to go through. And if you go into the camera settings, I've already reset all of these to the defaults, so this is what your phone should look like out of the box. Right at the top, we have the scene optimizer. Now for this one, I like to keep it on or off depending on the scenario. It definitely gives your photos a more processed look, like it'll make the sky look bluer and grass look greener, but some people may like that, and honestly, I think it can look good in certain scenarios. There's also a really useful feature that allows you to scan documents and text, and if you turn this feature off, then this is grayed out and you can't utilize that function. So for the most part, I just like to keep it on. Next, we have shot suggestions, and I really don't find this useful at all, so I leave it off. Of course, scan QR codes, I leave it on because everywhere uses QR these days. And then this is personal preference, but I like to keep this as take a burst shot when you're swiping the shutter. This way, if there's action or something fast going on, you can quickly take multiple frames. For videos, I just keep everything as is. And under advanced options, you can choose to enable high efficiency videos if you want to save some space. HDR10 is also a pretty cool option that you can enable, which just allows you to capture HDR video. Now under general, you can turn on tracking autofocus if you take pictures of a lot of moving subjects like cars, pets, or kids, and it'll just help lock on the focus as they're moving around. I always turn on grid lines because I just find that it helps with my composition. And then location tags is another personal preference. Under shooting methods, a lot of this is also personal preference, but I like to enable floating shutter button so I can move it around the screen and have easier access. Now settings to keep is a really interesting one, and I'm really glad that Samsung added this feature in because it is really useful. Camera mode is helpful if you shoot a lot of video and you don't want to be constantly switching back and forth between camera and video as you open the app. Selfie angle is one that I always toggle on because I like using that wide angle selfie camera and there's no point in making it narrower. If you use filters often, this is also a really helpful toggle so that you have the same consistent look across all of your shots. And the same thing applies for super steady mode if that's something that you use in video. And that is pretty much it for the basic camera settings. Now for the hidden settings, there is an app called Camera Assistant, which is available from the Galaxy Store. Not the Google Play Store, but the Samsung Galaxy Store. Now I'm not sure if it's available for all regions, but if you don't have it, you might be able to sideload it or there might be an alternative. Definitely do some research and sideload at your own risk. Once this is installed, once you go back to your camera settings and you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you should have a new section called Camera Assistant. Opening this up, you can see a ton of new features, and some of these are really useful for better image quality and capturing photos faster. Now starting from the top, we have Auto HDR. Now the phone will automatically take HDR photos even without Camera Assistant, but toggling this on definitely punches it up. And again, it's one of those things where you might like it or you might feel like it's too over-processed. Picture softening, I always leave off because I can soften it later in post if I want to. I don't want it coming out of the camera already looking soft. Auto lens switching may seem like a basic setting, but it's actually one of my favorites because I hate it when I'm trying to take a picture in low light scenarios and the camera doesn't actually use the 3x or 10x lens and instead it uses the main sensor. So by turning this off, it will keep the lens selection that you chose instead of choosing the automatic one that it thinks works best. Now, quick tap shutter is a really useful one, and I went in depth on this on my S23 best settings video. But basically what this enables is allows you to click the shutter and it captures the photo before your finger even leaves the button. So this doesn't actually increase the shutter speed per se, it just increases the delay from when you click the shutter to when the photo is taken. Now, this next setting is really useful if you find yourself taking a lot of photos that come out a little blurry or unfocused. This basically allows the camera to take a second to acquire focus before snapping the shot. While being useful at times, I find that it just delays the shutter too much, so I keep this feature off. Now, under capture speed, you have 3 options. And if you look at these comparison photos, you can see that they're taken in relatively low light, so this is pretty challenging conditions. I find that prioritized speed degrades the quality too much, so usually I just like to keep it on balanced. There's still a slight hit to quality, but it's nowhere near as noticeable. And then for timer options, I like to keep it on 3 pictures with 1.5 seconds in between each photo. Now on the main camera interface, you can see there's an additional set of buttons at the top. The most important one to me is the 3x4 icon, where if you click on it, you can choose the full 50 megapixel 3x4 option. This 50 megapixel mode is one of my favorites to use. There is a slight lag when you are taking the shot, but you just get so much more detail and croppability in post that it's well worth the trade-off. You also get less of that compression, so your photos come out looking a little bit cleaner and less like they were shot on a phone. Then finally, when you get into the More option, you have Pro Mode and Expert RAW. By default, Expert RAW is not installed, but you just have to click on it and then it will download. Expert RAW basically takes Pro Mode to the next level because it allows you to capture RAW files that have all that HDR data embedded. There are also a ton of additional settings that you can choose, like multiple exposures, as well as the astrophotography mode. The only downside to using this mode is the fact that you can't use the full 50 megapixel sensor. This is really unfortunate because pairing that 50 megapixel sensor with the computational RAWs would be amazing, and it's something that you can do on the S23 Ultra. Now moving on to the Flip 4. Most of these settings are the same as the Fold, so I'm not going to touch on every single one. There are a couple of different ones that are specific to this device, like the cover screen selfie ratio, but this one I just keep it on the default, which is match front camera. The good thing is that Camera Assistant is also available for this device, which will help improve the quality of the photo. So you can enable HDR, quick tap shutter, and under capture speed, you can also set it to balance. Now on this phone, I want to note that there is no higher megapixel option when you click on the 3x4 icon. You are just able to choose the different ratios. Definitely leave it on default because any other ratio will be cropping in on the image, so you'll be losing image quality there. And then if you go to More, you can see that there is also no option for Expert RAW. This is really unfortunate because it's a software feature that I feel like they definitely could have included if they wanted to, and for some reason they don't. If you want to shoot RAW, at least you still have your Pro mode, which is pretty much the same as any other Pro mode on a Samsung phone. Now, if you're still here, I appreciate it so much. These videos take a long time to make, and if you found it helpful, maybe even share it with a friend. So in the end, these cameras definitely feel like an afterthought on the foldables compared to the S23 Ultra. Some of the hardware isn't there, like the telephoto lens, and some of the features in the software are also missing. It's a real bummer for photographers or really just anyone who wants to take photography more seriously and capture some really great photos. Especially for the price point, these foldables really need to step up their cameras. On the positive side, they are by no means the worst cameras I've ever used, and this video is definitely nitpicking at a lot of things that may not even bother you at all. I think the option of having RAW and Expert RAW, along with the higher resolution modes, really do help a lot. And if Camera Assistant is available, I think that just unlocks a whole other level. After using these foldables for a while, I think the increased productivity is a worthy trade-off for a lesser camera system if you are interested in this form factor. I just hope that for the next generation of foldables, they'll have flagship cameras to match their flagship price. And if you guys have been using the zFlips or the zFolds or any other foldable for that matter, let me know how it's been for you. I know some people have experienced problems with the displays cracking, the hinges breaking, and other bugs, but a lot of people are also really happy with them and would never go back to a regular slab device. And definitely let me know your experience with the camera systems. Have people noticed the image quality difference, or does it really not bother you? Well, that's it for this video, and thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.